Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, February 13th, 2022, and today we're going to be talking about the 2024 presidential election and what the early polling data is telling us about this race that is expected to be extremely competitive. Now, taking a look at the closeness of the 2022 midterm elections, it is a bit weird to be talking about 2024 so early on, but like I was covering the 2020 election in 2017 and 2018, I think it is fair to start talking about the 2024 presidential election, especially since it has already been raced from well long before even the 2020 election. You see, the 2024 election isn't set in stone. We don't know who's going to be either the Democratic nominee for president or Republican nominee for president. The problem is that while this isn't an open race, meaning that, Joe Biden hasn't officially said he's not going to run for re-election, there is a possibility that he decides not to. During the 2020 election, he referred to himself as a transitional candidate, and I do think that in 99% of outcomes, he does end up running for re-election. But because he did not declare as quickly as President Trump did, I would argue that there is a possibility, while not large, but a slim one at that, a possibility that the Democrats don't have a nominee that is immediately there right off the bat. And amongst the potential candidates here, people really wouldn't be considering a bunch of potential candidates for 2024 unless there was a real concern or real consideration that he would not be running for re-election. As for the Republican side, we don't really know who's going to be running either. The Republicans have a bunch of people who have decided that they might run. You have anyone from the mayor of Miami to former President Donald Trump. So I think there's definitely something to be explored. There's definitely something to be discussed further, because the nominee of the presidential parties is going to be extremely impactful on the general election. But looking at the 2024 polls, pretty much we are working with the same type of candidates from 2020. We have Kamala Harris on the Democratic ticket, and we also have Joe Biden facing off against President Donald Trump. Now, occasionally the poll asked about Ron DeSantis, who's expected to be the second highest Republican contender for the nomination process. If you take a look at the 2024 presidential odds, what you will find is while the GOP is favored to win in this state, on the national level, taking a look at the candidate level, you will find that Ron DeSantis actually near is matched to where Joe Biden is, and Donald Trump is above Joe Biden in terms of who will win the presidential election come 2024. And combined together, Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump are at 53 cents for a yes share, which means that the majority of the people that are investing in this market do expect Republicans to win. And I think a lot of that can be due to the fact that, currently speaking, Joe Biden is disapproved of by a pretty heavy amount. When you take a look at his approval rating, what you will find is that about 12% more of the nation disapproves of Joe Biden's job as president than they do approve. And that's how it's been for quite some time now. Since August 29th, August 30th, is when Joe Biden officially fell out of favor within the American public. This was when the numbers began to flip. And for months, month after month after month, what we found was that Joe Biden, not only did he remain disapproved of, but the numbers have continuously gotten worse. And they continue to get worse and worse and worse. What we are starting to see is that there is some type of a reaction from the governors across some of these more pivotal states with large populations, that they are lifting mask mandates. They are lessening restrictions. They are trying to make things return to a sense of normalcy, and that's something that needs to could potentially help Joe Biden in terms of his overall approval rating. But knowing his approval rating, we can take a look at a bunch of these new polls that have been done over the past month or two that provide us a bit more context about what to expect in the 2024 presidential election. We are going to only be working with polls that were taken within 2022, the first day, January 1st, and beyond, simply because it is a bit more relevant, and I think that it would provide us better context than a poll that was taken maybe 6 to 8 months ago. So the first poll of the year came from Rasmussen Reports, which is understandably a Republican pollster. This is something that we already know, we have already discussed, already understand, right? This is a pollster that consistently showed Donald Trump well above where he was in terms of the approval rating back from Donald Trump's first term or only term, we don't know yet. Taking a look at, a lot of the other data that they push out, what they find is that Joe Biden is doing worse, according to Rasmussen, than he is amongst other polls, that the generic ballot is worse for Democrats amongst Rasmussen Reports than it is to other polls. Historically speaking, also, they aren't super accurate. They have a B rating for a reason. They definitely are an accurate pollster to an extent, but they don't seem to be getting the generic ballot, nor do they seem to be getting the national average in terms of the approval rating super accurate, all the time, like many other polls are able to do. But they released a number that even with this Republican lean shows Donald Trump ahead by a margin of just 6 percentage points against Joe Biden. Now, a margin of 6 for Donald Trump would actually be pretty much near a landslide type of election for the GOP. It wouldn't be 400 plus electoral votes, but it would be pretty substantial. You're talking maybe 350 at that point in time. A bunch of states would have to flip, because a 6-point victory for Donald Trump nationwide would mean that there is over a 10-point swing from the 2020 election. That could sway plenty states. Looking at the plenty of states, looking at the maps here, I mean, easily Wisconsin would flip, Michigan would flip, right? Pennsylvania would flip, Georgia would flip, North Carolina would stay, Arizona would flip, Florida obviously would stay. Ohio would stay, Iowa would stay. What we would find is that the state of Nevada very likely could flip, right? It is possible that Minnesota would flip, that the state of New Hampshire would flip, and I think that's not really out of the question. You'd find Nebraska second, Maine second, and here's the thing about this. That this map alone, in terms of swing states that were won under a map where Donald Trump is winning by 6, would be enough to hand Donald Trump the presidency with just a few couple of states. What you would find is that Texas would elevate you to 202. What you would find would that be Indiana, Tennessee, Missouri would bring you all the way up to 234. And then you would just add in a couple more of the larger states, Alabama, South Carolina, right? Louisiana, that's when the population starts to rise. Kentucky adds up, and then if we characterize the rest, what you're going to find is that the map ends up being so lopsided against the Democratic Party, and it doesn't just end here. If you're talking about a 10-point swing, New Mexico was decided over 10 points. New Mexico was decided by nearly that same amount. What's to say that in this scenario that Donald Trump isn't tapping into this base, that Donald Trump isn't tapping into Virginia the same way Glenn Youngkin did, or the same way, Colorado could potentially go red, or Maine at large could go red. Now, obviously not a prediction by any metric, but it is something to be said that if Donald Trump was to win by 6, a map like that wouldn't be super unreasonable. Moving forward, there was a poll from Redfield and Wilton Strategies. They pitted Donald Trump and Kamala Harris against each other twice. They also did it with Joe Biden. I believe they differentiated by likely and registered voters. What we find is that Biden defeats Trump by 2 amongst likely voters, only by 1 amongst registered voters. So it looks like he might have a narrow upper hand according to these pollsters. Less accurate than Rasmussen Reports, but still generally the same rating. Donald Trump defeats Kamala Harris amongst registered voters, but ties with her amongst likely voters. Very interesting to see that likely voters are more likely to vote for the Democratic Party and that Democrats perform better there, because historically speaking, that has not been the case. Moving forward upwards, what we find is that there is PEM Management Corporation. They show Biden ahead by 1 percentage point, but then McClellan and Associates, which is an even lower rated pollster, a CD rated pollster, shows Donald Trump defeating Joe Biden by a margin of 5 percentage points against Kamala Harris by 11 percentage points. And the surprising thing about this is that against Hillary Clinton in a rematch would only beat her by 10, despite Kamala Harris performing worse. Definitely something to consider. And if Donald Trump was truly to win against, let's say Kamala Harris by a margin of 11 points nationwide, you would actually see a lot more narrowing down of some of these states. I think that it is entirely possible that Oregon could go likely, potentially lean. Washington would go likely for sure. Maryland would be safe. I think California would be safe. Hawaii would probably be safe. Illinois would narrow down to likely. What you would find is New York would be safe, but New Jersey, Delaware, you would find Massachusetts would be safe still. Connecticut, Rhode Island could very well go lean. DC would stay the same. Vermont would stay the same. And, Maine's 1st district could be lean at that point in time. Sorry, likely for Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, and Delaware, not lean. So what you would find is that there would be a severe split within the Democratic Party from what used to be their electorate back in 2020 that would end up going to President Trump in 2024. I think that this is something that can definitely showcase just truly how unpopular Joe Biden is right now. I would also point it out that it doesn't reflect as positively for the GOP nationwide in terms of the generic ballot for 2022 as it does in the polls for 2024. Right now, the GOP maintains a lead of 2.2% nationwide, despite some of these polls that sometimes argue that the Republicans are ahead by just 2 to 3 points nationwide in the generic ballot, that Donald Trump is defeating his opponents by 11 points, 10 points, 5 points at a low. I think that this is something that needs to be addressed, and I made a video about it talking about the voting problem that the GOP has, and it definitely can be seen here. Harris Poll did another one where they asked a question between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, Kamala Harris and Ron DeSantis, and Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Surprisingly enough, they didn't do a question about Joe Biden and Ron DeSantis. I wonder why, but I think after seeing the Kamala Harris result, I think it would be pretty easy to figure out how the result would end up. Against Donald Trump Sr., And because I'm only saying that simply because that's the way they refer to him, because Donald Trump Jr. is potentially going to run for president. We don't know yet. That's something that is up in the air in terms of speculation. But in the matchup between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, again, Donald Trump wins by 6. Against Kamala Harris, he wins by 10. And against Ron DeSantis, actually, Kamala Harris only loses by 1. So Donald Trump wins by 10, yet Ron DeSantis only wins by 1. But the Kamala Harris number actually doesn't change. So a lot of this probably has to do with the fact that Ron DeSantis is a less recognizable name, that, Donald Trump just is someone who has been captivated the nation for quite some time now, has been a very recognizable name. There's not a single person in America, I think, who does not know who Donald Trump is, and at least they know who the president of the United States is. And I think it is something to be said that name recognition could be a hindrance to Ron DeSantis, but by the time you reach the general election, by the time you make it through that Republican primary process, name recognition is no longer an issue, because you need it in order to win in the first place. Another poll from the Morning Consult gives some better news to the Democratic Party. What they find is that the Democrats actually defeat all of their candidates here with Joe Biden on the ballot. He defeats Ron DeSantis by 5, defeats Mike Pence by 2, defeats Ted Cruz by 6, and Donald Trump by 1. Of course, Donald Trump has been very consistent as the narrowest one. Again, that could be due to name recognition. That could be due to the fact that Donald Trump has remained with his coalition, but they are a bit uneasy about backing people maybe like Ted Cruz or Ron DeSantis. Some people also might just say, they don't want to answer a question if they don't see a particular person on their ballot that they like. For instance, if a Republican from the Trump wing really likes Donald Trump and they don't see him as the Republican, they might say, I don't know how I'm going to vote, but in all actuality, they will more than likely end up voting for the Republican in that scenario. So looking at the Morning Consult poll, while some good news for the Democratic Party, not necessarily the best, and a Biden plus 1 point lead is nothing to be super happy about, but I will say that a Biden plus 1 point lead would return states such as Colorado and New Mexico, and states such as Virginia and potentially New Hampshire, potentially New Jersey, back into the Democratic column, but you would find some struggle, winning over some of these other states, back into the Democratic column. It would be very difficult to see how Democrats could win back Nevada or could win back Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania under that type of circumstance. Moving upwards, we have another poll from Echelon Insights and another one from Marquette Law School. Marquette Law School gives us the best rating with an A/B rated poll nationwide, so I think that is probably one of the more credible sources from 538 standards. What they find is that Joe Biden defeats Ron DeSantis by 8 points, but actually defeats Donald Trump by 10. I don't know if this number is, matching the rest of the averages. I think there is something to be said that potentially the best rated pollster does show the Democrats ahead. But on the other hand, I would argue that this could be an outlier. Not every poll is 100% accurate. Sometimes they completely miss the mark, and I think that could be the outcome here. Donald Trump doesn't have any type of name recognition problem, so the fact that he's only at 33% should be a red flag immediately. Donald Trump definitely has more than 33% support, and I think that there is definitely silent voters out there that are answering that poll saying, yeah, I'll vote for Biden, or they just have no answer, that are absolutely voting for Donald Trump in that potential matchup. Same thing with Ron DeSantis. But Echelon Insights, which is a Republican-leaning pollster, shows that Hillary Clinton loses to Trump by 1, but Biden defeats Donald Trump by 4. I'm not entirely sure, how this came to be. I think it is interesting to see that Hillary Clinton does, of course, underperform Joe Biden. The real reason why I'm surprised by this is the fact that Hillary Clinton was included in the first place and not Kamala Harris. Maybe they didn't want to waste money or just waste time polling something that they didn't think was happening, but Hillary Clinton running is pretty much a pipe dream, I think, at this point in time, and just doesn't actually, have any merit in terms of the speculation that she supposedly is having towards the presidential race. We're going to get through this a little bit quicker because a lot of the polls are telling us the same thing. What we will find, a nationwide YouGov poll shows Biden ahead by 2. Suffolk University did some Florida polls. I think that deserves a little bit further discussion later down the line, not necessarily something that can be discussed on the national level. February 2nd, YouGov did a poll, B-plus rated pollster here. Biden defeats DeSantis by 7 amongst both adults and registered voters. And then also on top of that, what we find is that Biden defeats Donald Trump Sr. by just 1 percentage point. Very interesting, if you ask me. February 10th, Redfield and Wilton Strategies shows that Kamala Harris loses to Trump by 3. Biden ties with him. Harris loses to Trump by 3, Biden by 1 amongst registered voters. So the first slate was likely voters and the second were registered voters. And in the most recent poll from Susquehanna Polling and Research, what we find is that amongst likely voters, 800 of them, Kamala Harris wins by 1 and Joe Biden wins by 3. So we're getting some mixed signals. I think that at the end of the day, what we are finding here is that Biden definitely performs better than any other type of Democrat on the ballot here, whether it's Hillary Clinton, whether it's Kamala Harris. Joe Biden is definitely the person to go through with, and I think that the Democratic Party absolutely knows that. This is something that is not new, and even with a negative approval rating, what we are finding is that the generic ballot and also the presidential polls for some of them are not giving the GOP an advantage like they were expecting, I think, with Joe Biden being disapproved of by such a heavy amount. Definitely a lot to unpack here, definitely a lot to explore further down the line, but my main takeaway is that Joe Biden seems to be at least holding on for right now. He's definitely not at a good point. He's not going to win re-election. If he wins the vote against Donald Trump by just 1 percentage point, by 2 percentage points, it's going to be very difficult. 3 even is a stretch. He definitely will need to replicate similar to what he got in 2020. And while that does seem to be, very impossible at this point in time, I would not put it past it. One of the people who had one of the biggest recoveries in their presidential campaigns in modern United States history. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.